My name is Hannah Whitlock. I'm 29 years old, and last November, my mother-in-law forgot to set a plate for me at Thanksgiving dinner. Not a misplaced chair, not a missing napkin, an entire plate missing, in a dining room where she'd spent 3 weeks planning a seating chart she posted to her stories. I figured it out when I walked into her formal dining room in Greenwich, Connecticut, carrying a pecan pie I'd baked from scratch at 4 in the morning and saw 12 place settings around a table built for 12, not 13. I counted them twice because I thought I was losing my mind. My husband's chair sat between his sister and his cousin Leela. There was no chair next to him. There was nowhere for me. My mother-in-law walked in behind me carrying a gravy boat and didn't even look surprised. She just glanced at me, then at the table and said, "Oh, sweetheart, you can grab one of the folding chairs from the garage." We sat the actual Bennett family by blood. You understand? 3 of her sisters stopped talking. My husband's grandmother set down her wine glass. Behind me, my own husband Daniel made this little nervous laugh and said, "Mom, come on." But he didn't move from where he was standing. He didn't pull out a chair. He didn't say, "She sits with me." He just stood there. I felt my face get hot, and for a second the whole dining room got that ringing quiet. You only hear when something bad is happening and everyone is waiting to see who flinches first. I set the pecan pie down on the sideboard very gently, like it was something breakable. Then I heard my own voice come out softer than I expected. "That's all right. I'll just head out." And I walked back through the foyer, past the coats and the boots and the stupid little autumn wreath she made me help her hang 2 weeks earlier, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cold. I didn't slam anything. I didn't cry yet. I just walked to my car, started the engine, and pulled out of that long brick driveway while my husband stood on the porch yelling my name like I was the one ruining Thanksgiving. By the time I got onto the Merritt Parkway, my phone was already going off in the cup holder. My husband, then my mother-in-law, then my sister-in-law, then my husband again. I let them ring. What none of them knew, what Daniel hadn't told them yet because he was scared to, was that 2 days earlier I had sat across from a partner at a firm in Manhattan and learned something about my mother-in-law's blood family that was about to turn every smug face at that dinner table inside out. If you've ever been treated like a guest in your own marriage, like the help with a ring on, stay with me. Because what looked like me running out of Thanksgiving was actually the first move in the quietest piece of family revenge I've ever pulled, and I didn't even know I was pulling it yet. I should back up. I grew up in a small town outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My dad was a high school math teacher. My mom worked the front desk at a dentist's office. We weren't poor, but we weren't the kind of family that took ski trips or kept a guest room ready. I worked at a Panera in high school. I took out loans to go to Penn State. I studied finance because my dad once told me, very seriously, over a plate of his sad spaghetti, that the people who suffer least in this country are the people who understand how money actually moves. So I learned. I worked my way up through 2 banks and then landed a senior associate role in private wealth management at a firm in Midtown Manhattan. By the time I was 27, I was managing portfolios for clients with 8-figure net worths. I bought my own 1-bedroom in Long Island City with a down payment I'd saved myself. I paid off my student loans early. None of that came from anybody. None of it came from a husband or a father-in-law or a trust fund somebody's grandfather set up before I was born. I met Daniel Bennett at a charity gala for pediatric cancer research 2.5 years ago. He works in commercial real estate, which sounds glamorous and is mostly spreadsheets and lunches. He was funny. He was polite to the waiters, which is the only test I've ever cared about. We dated for a year, got engaged, married last spring at a small place in the Berkshires because I refused to let his mother turn our wedding into a Greenwich Country Club fundraiser. His mother, Patricia Bennett, is a piece of work. I'm going to be honest about that, because I'm done being polite. Patricia grew up in a family that had old Connecticut money, the kind that came from textile mills 3 generations ago, and got laundered into respectable foundations and board seats by the time she was born. She married Daniel's father, Richard, who runs a private investment fund out of Stamford. Their house is one of those center hall colonials on a road where you can't see the neighbors' houses through the trees. They have a Labrador named Tucker. They go to Nantucket in August, you know the type. From the second Daniel brought me home, Patricia treated me like I was a temporary situation, not openly, not rude enough to give me anything to grab onto, just little things. She'd introduce me at parties as Daniel's wife, Hannah, she's in banking. Isn't that interesting? With that small pause before interesting, that meant the opposite. She'd ask where my parents were from like she was geolocating me. When I brought a bottle of wine to a dinner, she'd thank me, and then quietly swap it out before guests arrived. She'd compliment my outfit in a way that made me question it for the rest of the night. Death by 1,000 polite cuts. My sister-in-law Vanessa picked up the same habit. Vanessa is 34, divorced, lives in a converted carriage house on her parents' property, and works in interior design, which as far as I can tell means she posts pictures of her own living room on Instagram and occasionally sells a coffee table. She and Patricia are best friends. They text each other 30 times a day. They went to the same prep school 30 years apart. They have inside jokes about people I've never met, and anytime I'm in the room, they make sure to bring those jokes up so I can sit there smiling like I'm watching a play in a language I don't speak. The first big test came at a family dinner about 4 months into my marriage. We were at the house in Greenwich. Patricia had cooked, by which I mean she'd had a caterer drop off everything and she'd plated it. We were halfway through the second course when Patricia turned to Daniel and said, very casually, "Sweetheart, your father and I were thinking, since you and Hannah are settled now, it might be a good time to put the Long Island City unit in a Bennett trust, just for protection. You know, estate planning." I set down my fork. The Long Island City unit was my apartment. I bought it before I met Daniel. It was in my name, paid off, no mortgage. I'd kept it as an investment property after we moved into the place on the Upper East Side that we picked together. Patricia had said the Long Island City unit like it belonged to the family. I looked at Daniel. He didn't look at me. "It's Hannah's place, Mom," he said. "Not really mine." "Well, it's both of yours now, isn't it?" Patricia smiled at me. "We just want to make sure everything is structured properly, for taxes and so on. I had Marvin draw up some documents, he just needs Hannah to sign." Marvin was their estate attorney. I'd never met him. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but my place is already in a trust. My own trust. With my own attorney. So we're covered." Patricia's smile didn't move. "Oh, but family attorneys are so much better at coordinating these things. It's about consolidation, Hannah. You'll understand when you've been married a little longer." She reached over and patted my hand like I was a foreign exchange student. Daniel ate his salad. That was the moment I knew. That was the moment I should have left. But I didn't. I stayed because I loved my husband, and I told myself she was just nervous about her son, and I would prove I wasn't after anything, and eventually she'd warm up. I am embarrassed now, looking back, at how patient I was. How many holidays I spent baking pies at 4 in the morning. How many times I drove up to Greenwich on weekends to help her with charity events I wasn't even allowed to put my name on. I was working for a family that already decided I wasn't one. The Thanksgiving thing didn't come out of nowhere. About 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Daniel and I had been at a small dinner at his parents' house. Just family. Patricia, Richard, Vanessa, Daniel's grandmother Eleanor, and Daniel's uncle Gerald. Gerald is Richard's older brother, and he's the one Bennett who has always been kind to me. He's a retired tax attorney. Lives in a brownstone in the West Village with his husband, Carlos. Patricia tolerates him because he's family, but she clearly thinks he's an embarrassment. He thinks she's a snob. They've been politely at war for 40 years. After dinner, while Patricia and Vanessa were in the kitchen pretending to do dishes, Gerald pulled me out onto the back porch and lit one of those little cigars he likes. The yard was full of dead leaves and the kind of November cold that gets into your jaw. "Hannah," he said, "I want to ask you something. And I want you to answer me honestly. Because I respect you. Okay? Has Patricia ever spoken to you about the Whitman Foundation?" The Whitman Foundation was Patricia's family foundation. The one her mother set up in the 70s, the one that supposedly funded scholarships and arts grants in Fairfield County, the one Patricia chaired and Vanessa was on the board of. Not really. I mean, I know she runs it. He nodded slowly. He looked at me for a long second, like he was making a decision. I'm going to have my attorney call you next week, he said. Her name is Margaret. I'd like you to meet with her. There's something I need a second opinion on. And I'd rather it come from someone who works with money for a living and isn't on Patricia's Christmas card list. I asked him what it was about. He shook his head. Not here, just take the meeting, as a favor to me. So 2 days before Thanksgiving, I met with Margaret Liu in her office on the 37th floor of a building on Park Avenue, and she walked me through 6 years of foundation filings, bank statements, and donor receipts that Gerald had quietly been collecting since his sister-in-law Eleanor, Daniel's grandmother, had started asking him uncomfortable questions about where the money was actually going. The short version is this. The Whitman Foundation was, on paper, a family charitable trust. By the actual paperwork, more than 60% of its disbursements over the last 6 years had gone to entities that traced back to Patricia and Vanessa. A consulting fee to Vanessa's design business for event styling, a stipend to Patricia for executive director services, reimbursements for travel that was very obviously personal, payments to a researcher who turned out to be Vanessa's ex-husband before the divorce for work that didn't exist. The actual scholarships and arts grants were a fraction of what the foundation reported in its glossy annual newsletter. The newsletter Patricia sent to every Bennett relative every Christmas. Margaret slid the documents across the table and said, Mr. Bennett asked me to consult with you because he respects your discretion and your financial background. He wants to know if what he's looking at is what he thinks it is. I read for 40 minutes. I read carefully. I'd been doing this work for almost a decade. By the time I closed the last folder, my hands were a little cold. It's worse than he thinks, I said. Margaret nodded once. He doesn't want to destroy his sister-in-law, she said. He wants the foundation to actually do what it was created to do. His mother set it up. His mother is still alive. Her name is on every original document. And she has had a stroke. Patricia has been signing on her behalf using a power of attorney that was supposed to be limited. I asked her what Gerald wanted from me. He wants you to be aware, she said. He wants someone in the family, with your eyes, to know. And he wants you to know that when Eleanor passes, which her doctors say will likely be within the next year, the foundation governance reverts according to the original trust language. The successor chairs are named in order. Patricia is first, but if Patricia is found to be in breach of fiduciary duty, the chair passes to the next named successor. Who's the next successor? Margaret almost smiled. Daniel. I sat there for a long time. Does Daniel know? No. Eleanor named him 15 years ago, before he met you. She told Gerald it was because Daniel was the only Bennett boy who ever said please and thank you to the housekeeper. She told him not to tell anyone until the time came. I asked Margaret what she needed from me. She said nothing yet. Just keep the conversation. Just remember it. Gerald would decide when to act. I went home that night and I did not tell my husband. I want to be honest about that too. I did not tell him. Because I wasn't sure yet whose side he was on, and I'd learned, slowly over 2 years, that there was a side. There was always a side. There was always a side. And I had never once been on it. 2 days later, I baked a pecan pie at 4 in the morning and drove to Greenwich for Thanksgiving and counted 12 plates on a table set for 12. I want to walk you through what happened in that hour after I left, because it matters. I drove for about 20 minutes before I pulled into a mobile station off the parkway, parked under the bright yellow lights, and finally let myself cry. Not for long. Maybe 4 minutes. I cried because I was tired. I cried because part of me had really thought, this would be the year she would treat me like family. I cried because my husband had stood on the porch and let me go. Then, I wiped my face, blew my nose into a Dunkin' napkin, and called Gerald. He picked up on the first ring. Hannah. She didn't set a plate for me, I said. She said the table was for blood Bennetts. There was a long pause on the line. I could hear Carlos's voice in the background, soft, asking what was wrong. Where are you? Gerald asked. A gas station on the Merritt. Come to the city. Come now. Carlos is making duck. We have wine, stay the weekend if you want. I almost laughed. Are you sure? Hannah, I have wanted my real family at my Thanksgiving for 25 years. Come. I got back on the Parkway and headed for Manhattan. While I was driving, Daniel called 9 times. I let it go to voicemail every time. At a red light on the West Side Highway, I read his texts. They started with, "Where are you?" and ended with, "Please just come back, my mother is upset." This is making everything worse. Not once did he say my mother was wrong. Not once did he say, "I'll come meet you." Not once did he say I should have stood up for you. I got to Gerald and Carlos's brownstone around 4. They had a fire going. Carlos hugged me without asking and handed me a glass of wine. Gerald sat me down at his kitchen table, the one I'd had real conversations at, the one that had never made me feel like an audition. And he listened to the whole story. The plate. The folding chair. The garage. Patricia's face. Daniel's silence. When I finished, Gerald looked at Carlos. Carlos nodded. "It's time," Gerald said. I asked what he meant. He told me Eleanor, Daniel's grandmother, who had been the only other Bennett who'd ever made me feel welcome, had been clearer in the last 2 weeks than she had in months. He said she'd asked him directly last Sunday what was going on with the foundation. He said she'd cried. He said she was ready to revoke Patricia's power of attorney while she still had the capacity to do it, and to call a formal meeting of the Whitman Foundation board to address what had been happening. "She's been waiting," Gerald said, "because she didn't want to ruin Christmas. But what Patricia did to you today in her house is exactly the kind of thing my mother spent her whole life trying to keep out of this family. She has had enough." I asked him why he was telling me. "Why now?" "Because I want you to be in the room when it happens," he said. "Not as Daniel's wife. As a Bennett. And as the person whose career and discretion made it possible for us to know what we know without alerting her." He poured me more wine. "Also," he said, "because you walked out today, Hannah. You didn't fight. You didn't beg. You walked. That is exactly the right instinct. People who learn to walk away can be trusted with power." I spent Thanksgiving night in their guest room. I slept 12 hours. Daniel was up to 31 missed calls. When I finally turned my phone on the next morning, there was a text from Patricia. The first one she had ever sent me directly. It said, "Hannah, I think we need to have a conversation. You embarrassed Daniel yesterday. I think we should talk like adults." I screenshot it. I forwarded it to Margaret Lou without comment. Then I put my phone back down and helped Carlos make pancakes. On Saturday, I went home to the Upper East Side. Daniel was on the couch, unshaved, in the same sweatshirt he'd been wearing on Thursday. He stood up when I walked in. He started to say something. I put my hand up. "I need you to listen to me," I said, "and not interrupt." He sat back down. I told him what had happened on Thursday. I told him what it had felt like to walk into that dining room and count 12 plates. I told him I had stood there waiting for him to pull out a chair and that he had done nothing. I told him I was not going to apologize for leaving, and I was not going to apologize for staying with his uncle for 2 nights. I told him his mother had texted me asking to talk like adults, as if I had been the unreasonable one, and that I would not be talking to her until I was ready, and that he was not going to broker that conversation. He cried. He said he was sorry. He said his mother had told him I'd misunderstood, that the seating was a mistake, that the folding chair was a joke, and I'd taken it the wrong way. He said he didn't know what to do. I asked him a question. Just one. If your mother had told my sister, at my parents' house, to go grab a folding chair from the garage because she wasn't real family, what would you have done? He didn't answer for a long time. I would have walked her out, he said finally. Yes, I said. You would have. So would I. So would anyone who actually loved someone. What you did on Thursday wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. You can be sorry. I can hear that. But I'm not going to be the only adult in this marriage who stands up for me anymore. He nodded. He cried more. He said he understood. I said one more thing. Some things are happening in your family that you don't know about. You're going to hear about them in the next few weeks. When you do, I want you to remember that I am your wife. And your grandmother chose you for something a long time ago. And the person who has been lying to you about money is not me. I'm telling you this now so that when it all comes out, you can decide who you are without your mother in your ear. He asked me what I was talking about. I told him I couldn't say more yet. I told him it wasn't mine to tell. I told him he would understand soon. The Whitman Foundation board meeting took place 11 days later, on a Wednesday morning at the offices of Margaret Liu's firm. Eleanor was there in a wheelchair with her aide and her doctor present to attest to her capacity. Gerald was there. Carlos was there. Daniel was there because Margaret had sent him a formal letter informing him that as a named successor in the original Whitman Trust documents, his attendance was required. Patricia and Vanessa were there because they were sitting members of the board and had received the same notice, with no other context. I was there because Eleanor had asked me to be. I want to tell you what Patricia's face did when she walked into that conference room and saw me sitting next to Gerald, holding a folder. Her color drained. Just like that. The way ice melts off a windshield. She sat down anyway. She had to. There was a court reporter present. Margaret walked the room through 6 years of foundation transactions. Calmly. Slowly. Page by page. The consulting fees, the stipends. The phantom researcher. The event styling payments. The travel reimbursements for trips to Aspen that had nothing to do with charity work. Vanessa started crying about 40 minutes in. Patricia did not. Patricia sat there with her chin up, like she was at a parent-teacher conference. When Margaret finished, Eleanor spoke. Her voice was thin, but very clear. She said, "Patricia, I trusted you with my mother's name on a foundation I have given 30 years of my life to. I gave you my power of attorney because I thought my son's wife would protect the things I built. You used it to take care of yourself and my granddaughter and to dress it up as charity. I have spoken to Margaret. As of this morning, your power of attorney is revoked. As of this meeting, by vote of the remaining trustees, you are removed as chair. The chair passes to my grandson Daniel, per the original succession language. I am sorry it has come to this." Patricia opened her mouth. Eleanor raised one shaking finger. "I am not finished. The foundation will pursue recovery of misappropriated funds through every legal channel available. That decision is not mine to make alone, but I will be voting in favor of it. You will not be invited back to this board, and if you ever, in your life, treat another member of this family the way you treated Hannah Whitlock on Thanksgiving, in the house you live in because of money my mother left, I will spend the last clear year I have left making sure you regret it. Do you understand me, Patricia?" Patricia said yes. Vanessa was sobbing. Daniel had not moved. He was looking at me, and his eyes were wet. But he was looking at me like he was seeing something for the first time. The meeting ended. Margaret thanked everyone for their time. Patricia tried to corner me in the hallway. She put her hand on my arm and started to say my name. I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face, and I said very quietly, "Patricia, there is a folding chair in your garage. You should go sit in it." I walked out. The next 3 months were quiet in a way I hadn't known was possible. Patricia stopped texting. Vanessa moved out of the carriage house because the foundation stopped paying her consulting fees, and she couldn't afford it on her actual income. The interior design business went quiet. The Bennett family lawyers, separate from Margaret's firm, opened a recovery action against Patricia for approximately $1.8 million in misappropriated funds over 6 years. She agreed to a settlement to avoid criminal referral. They sold the Nantucket house. Richard, Daniel's father, who I had always assumed knew everything, turned out to have known almost nothing. He moved into a smaller place in Stamford. He filed for legal separation in February. Daniel stepped into the foundation chair slowly, with Margaret's guidance, and started turning it back into what it was supposed to be. Scholarships for first-generation students in Fairfield County. Real ones. Grants for arts programs in the public schools. He's not a finance person. He asks me questions. I answer them when he asks. I do not run his foundation. That is on purpose. Daniel and I went to couples therapy. He sat there every week for 6 months and worked on it. He moved out for 3 weeks at one point because I needed space, and he didn't argue. He cut off his mother completely for the first 4 months and only restarted contact under conditions I set and his therapist supported. He told me, sitting on our kitchen floor one Sunday night, that the worst thing he had ever done in his life was stand on that porch watching me drive away. He said he was going to spend the rest of our marriage making sure that was the last time. I believed him. I still believe him. But I watch. Eleanor passed in February. Peacefully, at home, with Gerald and Carlos and Daniel by her bed. I was there too. She squeezed my hand the night before and said very softly, "I'm glad he picked you. You held." I held it together until I got to the car. The first Thanksgiving after all of that, last week, we hosted at our place on the Upper East Side. Just 9 of us, Gerald and Carlos, my parents, who flew up from Harrisburg, Daniel's father Richard, who is quieter now and kinder than I knew he could be, Daniel's college roommate and his wife, and the 2 of us. I made the pecan pie again. I set 10 plates because at the last minute Daniel's cousin Leela called and asked if she could come, and I said yes, because Leela had been the only one at that table last year who had texted me to apologize. Patricia was not there. She had not been invited. She is, the last I heard, living in a 1-bedroom in Norwalk and taking a part-time job at a friend's gallery. We are not in touch. I don't know if we ever will be. I am at peace with that. Here is what I want you to know, if you've made it this far. If you are the daughter-in-law who keeps baking the pie. If you are the one being asked to grab a folding chair. If you are the one whose name gets left off the seating chart, and you are told you misunderstood. If your husband stands on the porch and watches you go. You are not crazy. You are not too sensitive. You are not the problem. You are allowed to walk out of dining rooms. You are allowed to count the plates. You are allowed to drive to a gas station and cry for 4 minutes and then call someone who actually loves you. You are allowed to take the meeting on the 37th floor. You are allowed to hold information that is not yours to tell yet. And you are allowed to walk into a conference room 11 days later and sit down next to the people who saw you the whole time. Real family is not the people who share blood with you. Real family is the people who pull out a chair before you have to ask. Real family is the uncle on the back porch with the small cigar who says, "I respect you, tell me what you know." Real family is the grandmother in the wheelchair who squeezes your hand and says, "I'm glad he picked you." Real family is the husband who, when he finally gets it, doesn't argue and doesn't make you carry it for him. And if you can't find that yet, sometimes you have to be the one who builds the table. You have to be the one who decides who gets a plate. You have to be the one who sets 10 settings and means every single one of them. I'm 29 years old. I am still in private wealth. I still bake pies. I still drive to Greenwich sometimes to visit Gerald and Carlos, who moved up there after they inherited Eleanor's house, the one with the long brick driveway and the autumn wreath I helped hang 2 years ago. The wreath is gone now. There's a different one. Carlos picked it out. The dining room table seats 12. We've never once had to grab a folding chair. Looking back now, almost a year later, I can see the whole thing as a chain of small choices that finally collided in one dining room. Patricia spent 30 years building a version of herself she could only afford with someone else's money. Every consulting fee she paid Vanessa, every Aspen trip she dressed up as foundation business, every quiet swap of a wine bottle I'd brought to dinner. Those were not separate moments. They were the same moment, repeated, until they became who she was. And when a person practices something long enough, the day comes when she does it in front of witnesses without even realizing she's doing it. 12 plates on a table for 12. That wasn't a mistake. That was a habit walking into daylight. I think about Daniel too. Standing on that porch, frozen. I used to ask myself how a grown man could love his wife and still not move his feet. I don't ask anymore. He did what he was trained to do. His mother raised him to keep the peace by being smaller than the room. He had to choose on a cold Thursday in November between the woman who taught him to flinch and the woman who taught him not to. He chose late. but he chose. And the months that came after, the therapy, the boundaries, the long Sundays on the kitchen floor, those were him doing the work he should have done years before he ever met me. Cause and effect doesn't care about timing. It just keeps a ledger. What I want anyone watching this to take with them is something simple, and it's not bitter. Your character is not what you say at the dinner table when everyone is watching. Your character is what you do in the 4 seconds between hearing something cruel and deciding how to respond. Patricia had her 4 seconds. So did Daniel. So did I. The difference between them and me in that 1 hour wasn't money or class or last name. It was that I had spent 10 years building a life that could survive me walking out of a room. I had my own apartment, my own career, my own savings. I didn't need anyone's permission to leave, which meant when leaving was the right thing to do, I could actually do it. Build that life. Whatever it looks like for you. A job that pays you fairly. A bank account no one else can touch. A friend who answers on the first ring. An uncle on a back porch with a small cigar. You don't build those things to use them. You build them so that when the moment comes, and it always comes for someone like us, you have somewhere to walk to. Be kind. Be patient. Be the person who bakes the pie at 4 in the morning, but know your worth so well that when someone tells you to grab a folding chair from the garage, you can set the pie down gently and walk out the door without saying anything sharp. The silence will do the work. The life you built will catch you, and the people who actually love you will be on the other end of the phone every time.